online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 1, I'm Emily Rose Adams. British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell could face life in jail as she's found guilty of recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And pandemic pressure, lateral flow tests and PCR appointments in England run out for a second day. Lawyers representing British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell say they've already started the appeals process after she was found guilty of recruiting underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. During the trial, 4 women described being abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. The 60-year-old is now facing the rest of her life behind bars.
We firmly believe in Ghislaine's innocence. Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated.
PCR appointments and lateral flow tests are unavailable in England for the second day in a row because of exceptional demand in the build-up to New Year's Eve. The Health Secretary is warning people they'll have to wait a little bit longer for COVID testing because the system is under significant pressure amid surging levels of infections. Meanwhile, the NHS is ramping up preparations for a possible rise in Omicron hospital admissions with new surge hubs across England. 8 hospital locations and some gyms and education centres, which will hold around 100 patients each, are being set up to prepare for worst-case scenarios. And a coroner has ruled the Liverpool bomber made an explosive device with murderous intent. Imad al-Swilmeen was killed when his bomb detonated inside a cab outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. It's also emerged he made it at his own flat in the city and it was designed to project shrapnel. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
A very warm welcome. Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 30th of December, and you're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio for my third show this week. And once again, the weather hasn't changed. It's grey, it's gloomy, it's very mild. But we're going to have an action-packed, full-on show this afternoon. I'm standing in for Ian Collins through this week and also Monday and Tuesday next week whilst he gets a well-earned rest. Now, this afternoon, I'm going to be going through the reflections of 2021. What occurred, the highs, the lows, the laughs and the tears. And I want your calls, your views. What was good for you in this year? What was bad? What made you laugh? What made you cry? We're going to be talking about testing. Will schools reopen without a problem next week? We've obviously got to talk about the potential early release of terrorists, almost 100 next year. We've got to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, more restrictions yet again being imposed by China on Hong Kong, and the cost of living crisis. That is going to be the big, massive topic over the coming months. We've got guests not only from the UK, but from the US, from Asia, all over the world. But I want your calls, your views. Please tweet us on @TalkRadio, call us 0344 499 1000 or text 87222 using the word talk. And the big question this afternoon, what were your great reflections of 2021? Let us know. This is my last show of the year and in my first year as a radio presenter. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
And don't forget, of course, that you can download the app to watch us live on TV or via the website, or via YouTube, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Samsung. There are so many ways. There really is no excuse. Now, it's unbelievable, isn't it? This year has flown by, but what a year. Just full of crises, really. We've had COVID crises, we've had political crises, and I think we're ending with the emerging financial crisis of the cost of living next year. And if we look back, the year started, of course, with the surging Delta variant and the horrendous wave of deaths that occurred mainly through January last year. But the vaccine programme was underway, and we were told it was 15 million jabs to our freedom, which was set for February. Well, February came and went. March came and went. And in fact, we didn't really get freedoms back gradually until May, June and July. And to think back, it was illegal to go on holiday. The speed of change was extraordinary. And a year ago, we never expected that all adults would have to be vaccinated, not just twice, but actually 3 times. We never expected that there would be huge pressure to vaccinate the over 12s, our children. We didn't expect this huge booster programme, and I recall that there was a general understanding that the vaccines would stop transmission and prevent infection. And as we now know, they do a great job, for which we're all hugely grateful, about reducing hospitalisation and reducing the severity and reducing deaths. But the truth is that actually the hope that they might dramatically reduce infections or transmissions, that hasn't played out. I think for me, the saddest month, without question, was April. The passing of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, was a massive loss to the nation, one of the foundation stones of, for all of us really, for the UK. And seeing that sight, we'll never forget, will we, of the Queen sitting alone in a pew wearing a mask. A lifetime committed to duty, service, self-sacrifice, and in a sense, leading the way, abiding by the rules. April was good for another reason. The pubs reopened. I know that was important for many. And then May came along. We had the local elections, and the Tories did very well. Unthinkable that just a short few weeks after and then months later, they would be struggling in by-elections and Boris would be seen as a liability. Yes, because in June, the Tories lost the safe seat of Chesham and Amersham. They had a 16,000 majority and they lost it to the Lib Dems to an 8,000 loss. Extraordinary. They weren't listening, and it was a sign of things to come. Summer, of course, was filled with the excitement of the Euro finals, England doing amazingly, getting to the finals. I was lucky enough to get to the semi-final. The joy of being back in a stadium, seeing people laugh and sing and smile, really did actually bring a tear to my eye. Of course, it helped beating Germany on the way in that final competition. And then, of course, the sadness of losing in the final to Italy. August was really filled with the disaster of the Afghanistan evacuation, catastrophic. And I think history will show that the US and the West, including the UK, made a absolutely terrible decision in leaving Afghanistan and leaving it badly and hastily. Another high for the year must, of course, possibly the greatest high in a sense, was the emergence of the 18-year-old tennis star Emma Raducanu. At Wimbledon, she did so well, but then breathing difficulties got to her in the final rounds of that. She'd only taken A-levels 3 months before. Incredible. And then in September, as a qualifier, not even in the main draw, as a qualifier, she won the Grand Slam title, the US Open. Amazing. And here's a statistic. In the whole of that tournament, the US Open, she never lost a single set. And I think I'm right in saying that never before has a qualifier won a Grand Slam tournament. And she was the first British winner of any Grand Slam tennis tournament since, well, I'm sure you had it on the tip of your tongue, 1977, Virginia Wade. September was important for another reason. Those of you who like James Bond, the film was released, No Time to Die, about 18 months late. It's great. If you haven't watched it yet, make sure you do. October, in a sense, October, I think, was dominated by the horrendous murder of the incredible MP, David Amess. At the end of October, we had COP26, and then we had those other characters, didn't we? Sigh, yes, Insulate Britain or Insult Britain, who irritated and frustrated and annoyed tens of millions of people in terms of their actions. Actually, I think they and the COP26 shenanigans, I think probably has done more harm to the cause of reducing emissions than anything else. We had the scandal of hundreds of private jets descending upon Glasgow. And also we started to see what is now the big issue of the day, the surge in gas prices, which is absolutely extraordinary. And then in November, well, the music fan lovers amongst you will recall, of course, that that's when Adele released her first album for 6 years. Incredible. But sadly, November was also when 27 migrants drowned trying to cross the English Channel. It was also the month when the Owen Paterson saga broke. Completely self-inflicted dramatics for the Tory party, and Boris dramatically, rapidly lost his shine. On the doorstep, as I was campaigning in Bexley, day after day, week after week, he suddenly went from being an asset to a huge liability. And then the Partygate stories started to emerge into early December. And the Tories, having just held on to Bexley, where their 18,000 majority reduced down to just 4,000, in December, yes, it happened, the big one. They lost a 23,000 majority in North Shropshire to the Lib Dems, losing it by some 5,000 votes after more and more Partygate stories, when people realised that it was one rule for the ruling Tory elite and a completely different rule for the rest of us. And then, of course, Omicron arrived, and in a sense, for many, have changed, for some ruined the end of the year, some people's Christmases in different parts of the UK. Lots of anxiety, and caused massive problems for the hospitality industry, the travel industry, and in a sense, we're now moving into the new year. And mercifully, Omicron does appear to be much, much milder, as the South Africans originally told us, by the way. And I think as we face into the new year, it's not COVID that's going to be the big issue. It's going to be the cost of living, energy prices, tax rises. That's what people are going to be focusing on. But call me 0344 with your reflections, your thoughts on the year, what worked and what didn't work for you. 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk.
Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
online, and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. A wet and windy afternoon ahead for central and northern areas. Elsewhere, it'll be grey but warm, staying mild for the evening. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Earlier, heavy downpours will ease, leaving scattered showers for the afternoon. As we move into the evening, much of this rain will worsen and spread across the UK. We'll also see some strong winds and coastal gales. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio. Rev it up, roar it out.
The voice of the people.
The home of common sense.
Solid state human debate on a digital platform.
Radio that stands to reason.
Listen and learn.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio. And already the tweets are coming in, the calls are coming in. Your reflections on 2021. Here's one I like. Hi, Richard. The SAGE modelling made me laugh at how ridiculous it was and cry that the government actually believed it. There's another one here from Peter, which we can use to talk with our next guest, is just a small point. With no lateral flow tests being available across the country for the past couple of days, will we see the number of positive cases virtually disappear? Be worth keeping an eye on. That's from Peter. And I'm going to discuss that now with Robert Halfon, Conservative MP for Harlow, who I think has been, in a sense, if not screaming, certainly talking loudly or almost shouting at the government throughout this year to keep the schools open, to get the schools open, and in a sense is faced with the same challenge next week. Robert, a very good afternoon to you, and I hope you've enjoyed the festive season. Thanks for joining me. So we've got, we're just a few days away from schools reopening, and obviously there's some issues with the supply of tests. Are you concerned that that's going to present additional challenges to getting schools open, or is there a workaround?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, and thank you for having me on your show. I think the government keeps saying we've got to protect our NHS. I don't think most people disagree with that, but we have to protect our children's futures as well. And I'd like to see adverts about that as much as we do about the NHS. And we have to keep our children learning again. We've done enormous damage through the lockdown to our children in terms of their mental health, their general well-being, their academic attainment, their life chances. They're way behind, and disadvantaged pupils have learned the least. And it shouldn't be an either or. It shouldn't be if we have enough tests, then the schools can open. The government has to make a decision if it's going to keep the schools open. Of course, there are strains on the testing system, but we have been providing more lateral flow tests, as I understand it, around 300 million this past month, more per head than any other country. And whilst there's strain on the system at the moment, I'm sure that given that the government's saying they're buying hundreds of millions of more of these tests, whether it's lateral flow or the PCR, but they will come through.
But my concern, Robert, is that the unions may use this as an opportunity. If it's not possible, for example, for all the children going back to school to take tests on the first day of term, or some tests in the first week, that the unions may say, well, we can't keep the teachers safe, therefore they've got to go online. I mean, this is a real worry, isn't it?
Well, there are, of course, different unions. So Jeff Barton, who's very reasonable from the ASCL head teachers union, will possibly take a different approach. But the NEU sometimes have the view that the computer says no, when it really should be, if it's not impossible, there must be a way to do it. I'm confident that the tests will be available for pupils. The government know that schools are a priority. The Secretary of State says that he wants to keep the schools open, the Education Secretary, so he's got to mean it. But we've also got to remember we're in a very different situation from last year, because most teachers and support staff will have been vaccinated. Many of them will have had the booster vaccination. We know that 56% of the adult population has now had the booster as well as the other two vaccinations. So there's no reason why most of our schools, if not all of them, should be open, and our children should be in those schools learning, being in the classrooms, meeting their friends as they should be.
And And if it is a problem, and if there is concerns amongst the teachers, perhaps we should prioritise what tests there are available, if there's any supply shortage going into next week, for the for the schools, for the children, for the whole academic environment, because it's the absolute foundation stone of everything, frankly, that we do in the UK, that we educate our children and our young people.
Well, this is why I say, if we say protect the NHS, we should be saying protecting our children's futures. And absolutely, tests should be a priority for schools and teachers and support staff, just as they are with the NHS. The government spends so much time focusing on the NHS and the economy. My view is that it should focus as much time, if not more, on education. We have to give those young people who've been damaged so much by being away from school a chance to climb that ladder of opportunity once again.
And Robert, at what point do we have the courage to stop testing healthy people who feel fantastic, who've got no symptoms? Because surely we can't keep. I think we may be testing more people than almost any other country, certainly in Europe, if not the world. At some point, that's got to stop.
Well, I mean, I don't have a problem, to be honest, with testing at all. If it helps people and gives people some sense of security that they haven't got COVID, and that's not my issue. I mean, we've got vaccinations now. My issue is that I want a proper plan to keep our children in school. I want a guarantee from the government. If teachers and support staff are away, the government should set up task forces with local authorities to help them with supply teachers and the volunteer army, which I called for last year and was announced finally by the Secretary of State at Christmas time. And we have graduates, have retired teachers, Ofsted inspectors going into schools to help where the schools have problems. But just because you have some problems in some schools doesn't mean you have problems in every school. And the way some people are talking is that this is going on across the board and schools can't open. And as I say, there seems to be an attitude in some quarters that the computer says no, when it should be, this is a national emergency. We want to get our children back into school, learning again, give them the catch-up they needed. So if it's not impossible, there must be a way to do it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a great believer. Where there's a will, there's a way. The glass is always half full. It's never half empty. So, Robert, would you support the growing discussion and debate, which I think is an important one for all of us to have, as to whether we continue to gradually reduce the isolation period? It's come down from 10 days to 7, which I welcome. In the US, obviously, they've now reduced it from 10 days to 5 days. Do you see that discussion growing over the next couple of weeks? Because actually that would be a potentially critical part of helping to keep schools open, classes staffed with teachers, by reducing that by another couple of days.
Well, to be honest, given what's happened to kids over the past 18 months with lockdown, those with disadvantaged backgrounds, I would support anything that kept teachers and support staff in school. And if it's good enough for the United States, I understand that Italy is considering going down to 3 days. I also think the government is considering this for the National Health Service workers. So why not bring it in for teachers and support staff as well? Because it will mean that there'll be less people away due to COVID reasons. It means the schools can function properly and that there'll be no excuse to send hundreds of kids home. I mean, it's worth remembering, just before Christmas, there were 200,000 children, 230,000 children not in school. And, there were another 100,000, I call them the ghost children, who have barely returned to school since the schools reopened. This is criminal. What we are doing for our children is nothing short of criminal. And that's why we have to get our kids back in school and take every measure possible to make it happen.
And I hear all of that, Robert, and you're so right. This huge group of give or take 100,000 ghost children is a huge scandal, and they've got to be found and encouraged back into school. But also the mental health, the anxiety that children have suffered. When can children get rid of the masks, Robert? Because I really don't think in schools they should be wearing masks. I think it's a terrible sort of feeling for them every day, putting these masks on. It makes them look inward rather than being excited and laughing and joyful.
Well, interestingly, the Children's Minister, Will Quint, who's a good guy, he came to my committee, the Education Committee, gave evidence that there's no evidence for the efficacy of masks in the classroom. And so what I don't understand is why we're requiring children to wear masks.
Who is requiring them? Is it the education sector, or is it the unions being too strong?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the unions will make their decision, but at the end of the day, the government have got to lead. And the unions will have a view and will defend their so-called interests. But at the end of the day, the government's got to lead and make the decision. I worry that masks have a bad effect on children, particularly those who have special educational needs or hearing abilities. And I want, if masks are worth it and making a difference, I want the evidence to see that is the case, and I haven't yet seen that evidence.
I've been calling for evidence. I think we'd all welcome it. It seems to be locked in a cupboard somewhere, tucked away in some distant classroom, because I haven't seen any evidence whatsoever. And it is such a concern, and I think it really does damage. I was hearing of, in a nursery, there was a class of 13 3-year-olds, I think it was, and 5 of them had major speech delay, lack of speech development, because they hadn't interacted with other children. They'd been forced to wear masks in nurseries. I mean, the damage that we've done to children, we may not know for a long time. The medium-term impact of this, Robert.
Well, this is why from day one of the lockdown, of the original lockdown, I said it was a mistake to close schools for most pupils. And even though the government said that it were open for vulnerable pupils, in the first stage of lockdown, something like only 5 or 6% of disadvantaged pupils went to school. We've done untold damage. We've seen the horrific case of Arthur. We know that perhaps if he'd been at school, people would have seen what was, there was something badly wrong, and something was happening to that child who sadly passed away. But this is why the government has got to make schools a priority. Okay, protect NHS, protect our children's futures. Why don't we have adverts about that? Why don't we have a long-term plan for education with a secure funding settlement? I welcome the extra $5 billion the government put in, and the other $100 million to help with COVID, but let's give education the energy and passion that is given to other areas in our national life.
Robert, thank you so much. And let's hope that the Education Secretary continues with your passion, because you have stood up for children all through the year. You haven't been listened to enough, in my view. You've had their interests absolutely foursquare at the forefront. And I hope the government listens to you, and I hope that every single school opens at the beginning of term next term with no online classes whatsoever. That was Robert Halfon, Conservative MP for Harlow. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be talking about terrorism, about parole boards. It's Tice Talk here at the home of common sense, Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Emily Rose Adams. British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell could face life in jail as she's found guilty of recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And pandemic pressure, lateral flow tests and PCR appointments in England run out for a second day. Lawyers representing British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell say they've already started the appeals process after she was found guilty of recruiting underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. During the trial, 4 women described being abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. The 6-year-old is now facing the rest of her life behind bars.
We firmly believe in Ghislaine's innocence. Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated.
PCR appointments and lateral flow tests are unavailable in England for the second day in a row because of exceptional demand in the build-up to New Year's Eve. The Health Secretary is warning people they'll have to wait a little bit longer for COVID testing because the system is under significant pressure amid surging levels of infections. Meanwhile, the NHS is ramping up preparations for a possible rise in Omicron hospital admissions with new surge hubs across England. 8 hospital locations and some gyms and education centres, which will hold around 100 patients each, are being set up to prepare for worst-case scenarios. And a coroner has ruled the Liverpool bomber made an explosive device with murderous intent. Imad al-Swilmeen was killed when his bomb detonated inside a cab outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. It's also emerged he made it at his own flat in the city, and it was designed to project shrapnel. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice
On Talk Radio.
Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice. Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and let's keep those tweets, those messages coming in about your reflections, good and bad, about 2021. There's one here from Bo. I fancy ringing in, but I wouldn't know where to start. So many subjects, so little time. I think I'll just scream at the radio instead as I clean up. Well, thanks for that, Bo. Keep them coming in and keep the calls coming in. 0344 499 1000. One here from Les, who says his best bit in 2021 was seeing Ian Blackford zooming in from his billiards room. How many people have a billiards room? I wonder. Anyway, we need to look at the story which is emerging of the parole board next year, considering potential early release for almost 100 terrorists. Yes, 100 terrorists who are potentially being considered for early release. And this is all to do with what was previously the automatic requirement for early release of prisoners once they'd reached halfway through their sentence. And a new emergency law came in last year, the Terrorist Offenders Act, in order to stop that, to prevent the automatic release at the halfway point. But now they have to be considered for early release at 2/3 of the way through the sentence. My simple question is, why consider terrorists for early release at all? I mean, surely 10 years is 10 years, 20 years is 20 years. It's not 2/3 of 20 years, and it's not 2/3 of life. If these people are terrorists and they want to cause serious harm and ill and damage and death to us here in the UK, life means life. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Henry Jackson, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Good afternoon, Henry. Thanks for joining us during this festive period. Sorry, Alan. Sorry. Alan, good afternoon.
You've made a common mistake, Richard.
I've made a common mistake. I'm sorry about that. It must be the festive madness. But also my fury at this topic of considering terrorists for early release. What am I missing? Why should they be considered for early release? And what's going to happen next year? Because some of the people under consideration, I mean, they look really bad people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the key part here. You've got some of the worst jihadist terrorists coming forward, a couple of other far right-wing terrorists as well, who are potentially up for this automatic consideration at the very least. I mean, thank goodness it's not actually the automatic release itself straight off. We've now got, a consideration. They've got to obviously go through this whole process. But you're asking the right question. Why is it that we need to waste resourcing, we need to waste time looking at some of the worst offenders in British jails and considering whether they have, reformed sufficiently to be allowed out early? I mean, they did the crime, they should really do the time as a result of it, particularly on crimes of this nature that are so heinous that we believe that they could still be obviously very dangerous to members of the public.
You're so right. And it is, not only is it the danger of early release, which is horrendous in itself, but it is actually the amount of time, the resources, the energy that is consumed in considering these early releases. And I have to say that when I read the rather mealy-mouthed statement from the Home Office, which read along the lines of the following: of course, they will be subject to further close monitoring as part of multi-agency public protection arrangements. I have to say that doesn't fill me with any comfort whatsoever. I mean, we've heard all that stuff before, And we've seen before the disastrous consequences of the mistakes of releasing bad people too early.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, close monitoring doesn't stop terrorists from launching attacks, and we have indeed seen cases of this. The most egregious example was, of course, the Streatham, kind of knifist who was under constant surveillance, was, of course, apprehended pretty quickly, but not before he'd started his spree. So, it's certainly the case that close monitoring will not solve a problem for someone who ends up not having been de-radicalized in prison. A great many people are not, of course. So it is this question about why should we spend this resourcing? Why should we go through painstaking levels of detail? I mean, to get the parole boards to meet with the proper, kind of information takes a long time to resolve, and it just seems a sort of a strange use of resourcing when the crimes these people have committed indicate why they should probably be locked up for as long as their sentence allows, if not longer even.
I mean, what's going on here? We've got a Conservative government with a huge majority who claim to be strong on law and order, and yet they want to release terrorists early. They've had an opportunity to change the law, and instead of reinforcing the fact that the public don't want terrorists released early, they've just nudged it from 50% to 2/3.
Well, it's a nudge with in fairness here, it's a nudge with additional criteria as well. I mean, it is now quite possible for parole boards to go through very extensive measures in order to work out what's going on here. For example, lie detector tests, can be used. Now, we know they're not infallible, but this is something that hadn't been done before and is clearly a useful tool to try and work out what on earth is going on in the minds of these people. It doesn't though alter the basic equation, which is these are, again, some of the worst people in our prisons. They have committed or tried to commit some of the worst crimes involving, obviously, attempted murder, sort of maiming people. Does it make sense to want to let these people out? How can we really be certain they will be sort of de-radicalized when they come out? Usman Khan's a good example, the Fisherman's Hall attack. Here was someone who managed to fool the parole board completely into thinking he was a cuddly gentleman.
This is the point, and that's a great example. That really is a great example where actually the parole board got it badly wrong and all the multi-agency arrangements failed. And again, we hear this additional statement from the parole board, which I read it with some incredulity. Public protection is always our top priority. Any terrorist convicted offender released into the community will be subject to some of the strictest licence conditions, including restrictions on where they can go, electronic devices, travel and work. Well, it didn't work with Usman Khan, and I fear it won't work with many others.
Well, I mean, the Usman Khan case was worst of all because he had successfully convinced everyone he had been de-radicalized. So to the point where he was able to travel on his own and, plan his attack with impunity. So clearly there is an issue here. If even one of these people who comes out, and let's not forget, by the way, Usman Khan's original associates from his original terrorist case are potentially up for this next year. So you begin to wonder if Khan himself, was able to fool people. How about his associates? What's their game? Have they de-radicalized, or are they lying in wait, hoping to strike as well in the same sort of way? It does seem, strange that we should waste resourcing in this way. I think there are better things the government can be spending money on. And clearly, when it comes to terrorist offenders, the public, and indeed all of us, we're all part of the public, but the point is we would all want to see terrorists serving the right amount of time for the crimes that they have committed or tried to commit.
I think that's right. It's just it's an ongoing worry for people in so many communities who suffer. And we keep hearing, once a year there's, or something give or take, there's another disaster, and we hear, oh, it must never happen again. And yet with these potential early releases, frankly, it might. It's not guaranteed, but people's concerns really are valid. And of these 92 being considered next year, are they really going to get every single one right?
Well, they're probably not going to get every single one right, and therefore what will end up happening is either the state has to lavish huge resourcing monitoring these people to make sure that they are keeping to the straight and narrow, or you will unfortunately get an attack of some kind. And the other problem is, of course, numbers. if the more of these people you release, the more likelihood that one bad apple will get through, and your resourcing is going to be scarce because you can't kind of monitor everyone 24/7, and that may well end up leading to problems as well. So again, I don't for a moment think that there might not be some people who have modified their views after a long prison sentence, but the idea this will be any other than a small minority is for the birds.
Completely. I'm really concerned about it, and I fear that disaster may follow if some of these people are allowed for early release. In my view, 10 years is 10 years, and life means life, particularly for these type of crimes. Alan, thank you so much for your thoughts. A very happy New Year to you. That was Alan Mendoza, director of the Henry Jackson Society. It's a real worry, and we've got to really keep on top of this. Because these terrorists, I think all of us just are so anxious about why they'd be allowed to be released early. Keep your calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. We'll be going to those in a second. We've got some other great tweets coming here. We've got one here, message from Jane. I cannot believe that Mark Drakeford won the election in May. Always a good show when you're in. I agree, given what we talked about yesterday with Mark Drakeford and the restrictions in Wales, I think for many people in Wales, he is definitely a low. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. A wet and windy afternoon ahead for central and northern areas. Elsewhere, it'll be grey but warm, staying mild for the evening. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Earlier, heavy downpours will ease, leaving scattered showers for the afternoon. As we move into the evening, much of this rain will worsen and spread across the UK. We'll also see some strong winds and coastal gales. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio.
Bish Bosh Berserk.
Full contact, common sense conversation.
Lively debate, now with 0% drift and dither.
Always read the label.
A roadmap for the future of debate. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Keep those calls coming in 0344 499 1000. And we've got some great social media. People's reflections on 2021. What sent you mad and what kept you sane? There's a great one here from Les. I think it's Les, or is it Lee? Lee, who says, the best thing for me was getting to watch my team, the Southern New Hampshire University women's soccer team, after 22 months without action due to COVID, winning their franchise. They kept us sane. That's a sort of great story about the joy of being able to be outside, to play games, do sport again. And I was one of the team here just before the show started. She told me how she actually cried when she danced for the first time in 18 months. These are sort of the emotions that people have all been feeling, and just so significant for everybody. But there's a sad tweet that's come in here. A friend whose 4-year-old son hadn't seen for 18 months, almost hadn't seen another human's face apart from in their own family. Again, that's, one of the tragedies. Robert Halfon earlier was talking about the mental health damage to children. We may never know how much damage has been caused to our children, some of the youngest of our children, what they've suffered, how long it'll take them to get back to be able to speaking properly, to have that confidence to laugh and to play in the way that they always would have done. We've got David on the line from London, I think. David, a very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Richard.
Hi there. So what's been your high, low or laugh or tear through 2021, David?
Well, Richard, I feel we're moving into a dictatorship because you've got people in government and councils acting in their own interests. They're closing roads with low traffic neighbourhoods, which is displacing traffic onto neighbouring roads. They're expecting everyone to cycle. People are trapped in their homes because of the ultra emission zone. You've got 24/7 bus lanes, and you've got constricting of road space on Park Lane and Euston Road. People trying to get home and from work and they're delayed. And I don't understand how the government can look on and think that's okay.
You're so right. I live in London as well, David, and the restrictions, many of which have actually been imposed by the mayor, of course, not actually the government. I mean, the low traffic neighbourhoods, I know absolutely how much grief they are causing to so many people, stopping emergency ambulances, being able to get to patients in need and so on. And that is definitely one of the huge lows this year, that being able to move around London has got harder and harder. But I think actually, in fairness, that's applied actually, David, all over the UK. Cities have been, local councils in cities have been imposing additional restrictions.
Mm. Yeah, and they're going to continue doing it. This is the government's plan, and it's a frightening prospect, Richard, because cycling is not going to work. It's not for everyone. It's not for the majority. It's ridiculous.
Well, in front of I cycle a bit. I mean, it's part of the range of ways of travelling, but in a sense, it can't be allowed to take over from all the road space, and it's just a question of balance. I do think, in fairness, I'm not sure it's the government's plan. I fear in many cases it's local council's plan, but the net impact is the same. And as I say, it's not just in London. Although there was a little bit of good news. I think it was the borough of Harrow, where actually they did vote. The council has got such strong feelings from their residents. They did actually vote to remove the low traffic neighbourhood schemes, and I think actually others may be doing similar. So there is some hope, but it is not good at all. Not good at all, David. And
Okay. Well, fair enough, but lots of councils have been getting petitions from people, and a lot of them are not listening, but hopefully people will keep on petitioning, and hopefully more will be done, yeah.
Without question, it's absolutely vital. Just whilst I've got you on there, David, so what were your views about the discussion? Have you heard the discussion about the parole board and early release of terrorists? Do you think that's sensible? Do you trust the parole board's judgment, or would you rather see them see out the due term of their sentence?
It's probably beyond my remit. I don't know what to say about that. It's just not for me to say, Richard. It only takes one terrorist to cause a lot of damage, and it's such a big subject, Richard. I'm not sure what to say about it.
Well, it is a big subject, but it's a threat to us all. It's an anxiety to us all. It really is a huge concern. Well, David, thank you very much. Have a great new year, whether you've got a party planned or whether you're going to have a quiet one. Best wishes for the new year. Thanks very much for calling. And that was David in London with his concerns about the imposition of controls, more restrictions across London. If you're suffering from those restrictions, whether it's in London or any other towns or cities, give us a call with your reflections as well on 2021 and your hopes how things may get better in 2022. And I'll just, we've got some tweets coming in here, which was on the back of, here we are, one's where it come from Lee. On the back of your chat with Dr. Mendoza, the thing I'll never get my head round about 20 is how, I've lost it now. There we go. How the Star Hobson only got 8 years for her part in a child's death. So that was from Lee. And then we've got, I like this from Lord Drew. Highlight of 2021 is Talk Radio. Thanks for keeping us sane. That is a great tweet. Thanks for that very much indeed. So keep those calls coming in. After the top of the hour, we're going to be going international. We're going to be looking at how how China is once again imposing yet more restrictions on Hong Kong, more freedoms being taken away, with yet another news outlet being essentially being closed down, more people being arrested. Absolutely horrendous as to what's going on there, why that's happening. Really quite extraordinary. I think in a sense we knew that this would happen. It's just happened faster than ever. The other thing that we're going to be talking about later is, in a sense, we've got the cost of living crisis that I've referred to. But yet we hear today that property prices all over the country, in particular, funnily enough, in Wales, property prices are soaring. So for many people, in a sense, their asset prices are going up. But in terms of day-to-day living costs, actually, it's going to be a really challenging year. And so the expression that we often hear, where people can be asset rich but cash poor, could be a real issue over the coming year. You've got a situation, property prices soaring. In Wales, I think the average price has gone up by about 15%. And yet you've got the stock markets, which is back to pre-COVID level. If any of you have got any Bitcoin, I haven't, but if any of you have got any Bitcoin, that's been soaring. So asset prices rising, but actually the day-to-day cost of living is going to be a real challenge. We're going to be talking about that later in the show because I just think this is going to be a massive problem for everybody. Tax increases coming down the pipe in April. We've got Ross Clark, who wrote a brilliant article in the Daily Mail on later on. Also in the second hour, stay with us. We're going to be talking to John Naboulier about Ghislaine Maxwell, obviously being found guilty of those heinous sex charges. And we're going to be talking to him about what's going on with President Biden, talking to President Putin, concerns about Ukraine. So lots to talk about. Don't go anywhere and keep those calls coming in. Your thoughts, your concerns, your joys, your laughter, your tears in 2021. And will we be able to laugh any more in 2022? These are the big issues. These are what I want to talk about. And this is where I want your reflections, your thoughts, your calls. Don't hold back. Stay with us. You are, of course, listening to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 2, I'm Nadira Tudor. British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell could face life in jail as she's found guilty of recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And pandemic pressure, lateral flow tests and PCR appointments in England run out for a second day. Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have already started their appeal after she was convicted of recruiting underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. During the trial, 4 women described being abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. The 6-year-old is now facing the rest of her life behind bars after being found guilty of charges, including sex trafficking a minor.
The road to justice has been far too long. But today, justice has been done. I want to commend the bravery of the girls.
PCR appointments and lateral flow tests are unavailable in England for the second day in a row because of exceptional demand in the build-up to New Year's Eve. The Health Secretary is warning people they'll have to wait a little bit longer for COVID testing because the system is under significant pressure amid surging levels of infections. Meanwhile, the NHS is ramping up preparations for a possible rise in Omicron hospital admissions with new surge hubs across England. 8 hospital locations and some gyms and education centres, which will hold around 100 patients each, are being set up to prepare for worst-case scenarios. And a coroner has ruled a Liverpool bomber made an explosive device with murderous intent. Ahmad al-Swilmeen was killed when his bomb detonated inside a cab outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. It's also emerged he made it at his own flat in the city and that it was designed to project shrapnel. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio. Standing up, speaking out. Richard Tice. Powered by Debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Richard Tice. A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. I'm standing in once again for Ian Collins, who's enjoying his holidays. Well-earned, justified rest during this festive season. And we're talking about the reflections on 2021, the highs, the lows, the laughs, the tears, and in some cases, the fears. And I want your reflections. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, on what 2021, some of your best reflections. What are the great memories and what were the sadnesses? What were the joys? There's a wonderful tweet come in from Les, who says a fun moment was the festive message from Julia Hartley Brewer professing that we should stay tuned, that she would stay tuned, and she'd be with us from 4,000 miles away, where her gin and tonic would be jingling in a gyroscopic jubilee of something alcoholic. Fantastic. Well, talking about travelling, we've got to go thousands of miles to Asia because we need to talk about what's going on in Hong Kong. Once again, China, the Chinese communist regime, has been imposing yet more restrictions on freedom of speech and on democracy in Hong Kong, where 200 police raided yesterday a pro-democracy news outlet in Hong Kong and a website called Stand News, where 7 figures from this news outlet were actually arrested in a dawn raid. And I'm delighted to be joined now by Ross Feingold, a political strategist in Asia. Ross, a very good afternoon, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you've been enjoying the festive season. We've spoken a number of times about what's going on in Hong Kong, Ross, but once again, it seems like a sort of constant drip of the regime, in a sense, just continuing, sort of closing the ability for anybody to speak out on anything.
Yeah, that's a really great way to describe it, and thanks for having me back, Richard. The issue, besides the ability of an independent media to exist, to write, to publish, to criticize, the issue for a lot of these people in Hong Kong, whether they're journalists or politicians or non-government organization activists, is activities that heretofore were simply not an issue in the time, whether before the handover in 1997 or in the decades after 1997, have now become criminalized. So when you describe it as a drip, 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 it's very accurate, if for no other reason that the authorities could investigate and point out some kind of interaction, for example. One of the charges that's frequently leveled in the recent months or the last year plus since the national security law was implemented is collusion with foreign forces. So meetings or taking money, for example, an NGO that may have received a grant from a foreign organization. Again, heretofore this was considered non-issues. It was normal behavior, just like it would have been in other countries. So there's a large number of potential targets. If the authorities want to say a media outlet or an NGO or a politician had some kind of what is now illegal interaction with foreign organizations, the scope of targets is potentially very broad. And that's why now, a year plus after the national security law was implemented, even after other personalities, again, whether they're media or politicians or NGO activists, have already been charged with crimes that broadly fall within the same scope, there are still additional targets for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region's government to prosecute.
It seems endless, and it just seems a sort of gradual, whether it's once a fortnight, once a month, this just sort of continual tightening of the noose. And it must be, for those pro-democracy websites, news outlets that are continuing, they must feel, who's next? And are people essentially fleeing Hong Kong for fear of being arrested, for fear of being locked up, having these charges leveled against them? What's the current mood?
Well, certainly people who might fall within the scope, and we know that a lot of them have indeed left. They've left for Germany or the UK or Australia, Canada, or the United States, and some cases here in Taiwan as well. But not everybody has fled, and Stand News is a good example of that. And there's still a few other websites of a similar nature, both in English and in Chinese language, that are still publishing, that are still independent, but obviously they have to be questioned whether or not the nature of their content is also going to make them liable to criminal charges, and whether or not they should take the initiative to shut down or even to leave. So people who are involved in this kind of work, whether it's politics or independent journalism, they certainly have good reason to worry that their past statements might become a target of authorities.
And how easy is it, Ross, to move elsewhere in Asia, but to continue to report on what's going on in Hong Kong and in China? For some of these journalistic
that's also a great question, because we've seen a lot of journalists relocate here to Taiwan. Some cases, most notably the New York Times, they really relocated a lot of staff from Hong Kong to Seoul, South Korea. But it's difficult, especially if you want to cover political news, but even if you want to cover business news as well, you need to be on the ground. You need to be talking to people in industry, for example. You need to be talking to people in the supply chain if you're trying to cover an industry, and China is still an important manufacturing base. So that's definitely an issue to watch as we enter a new year going forward, is what kind of reporting will we see, even if we're not talking about purely political stuff and we're talking about other types of reporting. But to the extent that independent media, journalists from multinational news outlets, if they decide that Hong Kong is not a safe place for them and they do relocate, whether to Taipei, Seoul, Tokyo, somewhere in Southeast Asia like Singapore or Bangkok, certainly it's going to have an effect on the news coverage that we'll see coming out of Hong Kong and China.
In a sense, it's an opportunity for some of those other capitals that you've just referred to, in a sense, Hong Kong's loss is their benefit in terms of great journalists, great reporters, news outlets relocating. But it reduces.
Theory, yes, but again, having the ability to access information is difficult if you're far away. There's another very interesting angle to that as well, which is there's also a trend of global news organizations. If there's a Western reporter who feels it's not safe, they could replace them with a local person who's still comfortable writing the news. And in some cases, we also see journalists from Southeast Asian countries taking up those jobs, sometimes from countries that have better relations with China. And some media outlets feel, well, that might be a safe lane to be in. We have a Thai or a Malaysian or a Singapore journalist cover Hong Kong or China.
That's right. And indeed, for example, one of our correspondents that we sometimes liaise to and talk to, he actually said he's being essentially attacked by the Communist Party and he's scared of being arrested, so he needs to lie low. This sort of intimidation, it's relentless and it's ongoing, and I fear that it's getting worse and worse, Ross.
Certainly, and that's why I said we'll have to watch what kind of quality of news coverage we see going forward about Hong Kong or about China. A year from now, we might have this conversation, and you'll ask me what kind of news coverage came out of those two areas, or Macau as well, which has been in the news because of changes to the gambling industry. And we might have a conversation where the only news we saw was mostly positive news. It was about economic growth and trade shows and wonderful things that the government is doing for the public. So it's certainly worth monitoring in the coming months what kind of news coverage we'll be able to see from these regions, especially if the independent and critical media of Hong Kong is no longer going to operate the same way that it did in the past.
That's right. I'm just increasingly concerned. Ross, thank you so much for those thoughts. That was Ross Feingold from Taiwan, speaking about the continuing repression of democracy, of freedom of speech, of news outlets in Hong Kong, which is a real concern to us. And of course, we've made the offer, haven't we, of for about over 1 million Hong Kong citizens with the British Overseas National Passport to relocate here to the UK. So concerned is our government about what's going on in Hong Kong. Keep those tweets coming in. We've got one. Oh, here's one from Tonya Buxton, a regular contributor. Straight talking, common sense. That's the remedy we all need right now. Thank you for that. And then we've got also one about what I discussed about property prices from Julian, who says, with property prices going through the roof, when will people discuss the change in legislation allowing banks to own and rent property? It says it's a conflict of interest. And according to Julian, thinks it's frankly criminal in terms of the potential impact that has on property prices. And it is a real concern. And you get this widening gulf between those with assets that are going up in value and the young, those that are renting, that are not able to get on the property ladder. And in a sense, these continuing low interest rates will fuel that growth and fuel that inequality, that divide. And of course, it's the asset owners, the relatively wealthy who are doing well, and of course, the house builders. Keep the calls coming in 0344 499 1000. What are your highs and lows about the year just gone? Or indeed, what are you hoping for in 2022? How long do you think Boris, with all the shenanigans that's gone on recently, how long will he survive in 2022? Will he bring you any New Year joy by not imposing any more restrictions, by keeping the schools open? What are your concerns? What are your thoughts? What are your fears? Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. A wet and windy afternoon ahead for the central and northern areas of the country. Elsewhere, it'll be grey but warm, staying mild for the evening. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Earlier, heavy downpours will ease, leaving scattered showers for the afternoon, but it'll still feel warm, temperatures hovering around 13 degrees. As we move into the evening, much of this rain will worsen and spread across the UK. We'll also see strong winds and some coastal gales. It's not all bad news, though, as it'll stay mild, peaking at 13 degrees in the south. Looking ahead at the 5-day forecast. Cloudy in London for the next couple of days, turning wetter on Sunday, where heavy rain will set in, and mild over the weekend with temperatures peaking at 14 degrees. Now, a mixed outlook down south in Hove, dry until Sunday when rain will set in there. This will get heavier as we move into next week, but we will see some sunshine too. Sun and cloud for Newcastle, starting warm at 13 degrees tomorrow and getting colder over the weekend, dipping down to just 5 degrees on Tuesday. Meanwhile, in America, a possible tornado has been spotted in the state of Georgia. Strong winds have damaged properties and trees in the city of Bainbridge. No casualties have been recorded. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio. Shoot your shot.
Danger. Slippery people.
Uncomplicated life rubric for hungry thought thinkers.
Rock the House of Commons.
It's Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. We were just talking about the restrictions on the media in Hong Kong and some interesting thoughts coming in on the tweets here. Really, Hong Kong situation is a message here where there's no name. Any parallels in Europe and the UK with mainstream media and social media platforms censoring any question of government COVID policy? There's no question there has been some censoring of free speech here in the UK. You haven't been allowed to talk about certain things. For example, we weren't allowed to talk about the Great Barrington Declaration on the mainstream media. But here, of course, at Talk Radio, we can talk about this stuff. We are still the home of free speech. And tell us what also your hopes for next year, as opposed to the concerns, the dramas of 2021. Do you hope that actually the Chancellor might do a U-turn and start reducing taxes as opposed to increasing taxes? Are you hopeful that the government might listen to the concerns about energy prices and do something about it? These are the big issues that we face. Another one from here, from Angela. She says, the lows are the constant fear and propaganda from media and government. The high, this is rather nice, the Chelsea Flower Show, which was an inspiration. And Angela's hope for next year, I think all of us share this without question, a normal life, free from COVID restrictions. Well, I suspect there are many people all over the world who also share that view. And I'm delighted now to be joined from the US by John LeBouillier, former Republican congressman, because there's lots of news going on in the US, of course. In the US, the news broke that Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty of 5 of the 6 charges, I think it was, found guilty of heinous crimes, essentially sexual crimes with Jeffrey Epstein, who was she had been essentially sort of co-conspirator with her lover, and she will spend many, many years in prison. John, a very good afternoon to you and happy festive season to you. So it's big news over here because of Ghislaine Maxwell's, being part of the Maxwell family, which was huge in the media, and the scandal of what her father did. But how big a news is this in the US, the Ghislaine Maxwell story?
Big. It was the lead story on all the network news last night after the conviction at our 6:30 p.m. network news, and this morning at 7 a.m. it was still the lead story. It's sex, it's horrible child trafficking. It involves famous people: Prince Andrew, President Trump, President Clinton, Ehud Barak, Alan Dershowitz. All the Bill Gates. Bill Gates. So many big people have been involved in this case that it has gotten a lot of attention.
And maybe we'll continue to do so. We hear from her family that they're planning to appeal. I don't know how long. If they do appeal, what's the time period for that to take place?
Well, the way it works, she's convicted in federal court. She will be sentenced February, March, somewhere in there. She will probably get a very long sentence. She will appeal after the sentencing. The odds of winning on appeal in a federal court are pretty slim because they usually uphold federal convictions. You never know, but she's going to try it, but I wouldn't count on it. I think the odds are she's going to spend the rest of her life behind bars in federal prison.
In a federal prison. And obviously she's behind bars until she gets convicted, and deservedly so based on everything that we read. And there must be, actually, you've referred to some of the names there, but there must be many people who are worried about the links, their ties with her, because she was so well connected across society, across the whole of the US, wasn't she?
Well, because he was, I have to say, I don't relate to any of this. I don't understand these powerful men like Bill Gates spending time with Jeffrey Epstein. And I don't know what he was doing there. I don't know if they were discussing financial stuff or if he was having sex with underage girls. I don't know what went on, but why so many people? The Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, flying to the Caribbean to go to that island. Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Bill Clinton after he's president, Donald Trump before he's president, hanging out with this guy, going to parties, using his airplane. The whole thing is really bad and very sad because these girls are ruined by it.
Absolutely devastating for so many girls' lives. We need to move on, John, to talk about other matters. President Biden, who's obviously been suffering some, low poll ratings in the US, lots of challenges on his desk, but in particular, the relationship with President Putin and what's going on the border of Ukraine, where still Russia is massing tens of thousands, potentially 100,000 Russian troops on the border as part of some, a massive sort of negotiation that I think Putin is playing with the West. And so there's is there a phone call being lined up today between President Biden and President Putin, apparently?
Yep. In 5.5 hours from now, they're having a phone call. Apparently, it's reported that Putin asked for the phone call. I don't know why they just had a call a couple weeks ago. So it's good that they're talking. We don't know. I don't know. The public hasn't been told the subject of the call. It's reported that it's about the Ukrainian situation. We'll find out. It's my 3 p.m. this afternoon. The call will happen pretty late at night tonight in Moscow, a night before New Year's Eve. Seems a little strange, but here we go. And then there are talks at the foreign minister level in Geneva in a week and a half.
That's right, with officials, because actually the issues involved are so significant. The threat of conflict, real conflict in Ukraine. If Putin decides that he wants to annex another part of Ukraine, or indeed the whole country, I mean that is something that is just unimaginable. But perhaps it is that Putin doesn't want war with Ukraine. What he really wants to do is get a cast iron guarantee that Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO, and also, of course, he's playing games with the supply and the pricing of gas, and he wants this new pipeline, Nord Stream 2, which has been built but not yet approved or opened to Germany. He wants that open, doesn't he?
And what's one other thing that going through your list, I think he wants some sort of guarantee that NATO will not put offensive weaponry in NATO countries near Russia, like Poland and the Baltic republics. And I don't know that NATO will make that promise. I don't know that they'll accede to any of it. We have the right to put weapons where we want. It doesn't mean we're going to, but we're not going to give up the right to. And I don't think we are going to deny forever Ukraine the right to apply for membership. I mean, my God, when I think that Bulgaria, which used to be like this with the Soviet Union, they did all the murders for the Soviets. They're a member of NATO, which must drive Putin crazy. So.
Yes, I mean, he is clearly concerned. It's interesting, isn't it? We've got concerns that NATO isn't strong enough and that it needs more resourcing. And in a sense, given what happened in Afghanistan, there were sort of some concerns about, actually how strong NATO really is. But Putin, he's absolutely determined, in a sense, for NATO not to gather any additional strength, I guess. And maybe that's his concern about Ukraine joining it.
Right. And I'm not sure they're going to be allowed in anytime soon. I don't know the status of that. It would be a provocative act by NATO to admit Ukraine in. So I think if I'm Biden, I'm delaying that decision. I'm not foreclosing it, but I'm not accelerating it either. I'd rather just leave it there and stop Putin from going in. However, if he goes in, he may not go in a full-scale invasion. It may be a repeat of what went on before Crimea. Remember the little green men with no identification on their uniforms who were clearly Russian soldiers, but they were sort of out of formal uniform. If there's that type of stuff about to begin, I think Putin's making a mistake. Joe Biden is much tougher than he appears visually. He's a nice guy, but underneath it, I would not want to tick off Joe Biden. And if Putin pushes it, what he's going to get is two things. He's going to get Russia taken out of the SWIFT banking system, which we could do like that. And you take them out of that, they can't wire any money around the world, and no one can wire money into Russia, which will paralyze their business community.
I mean, that clearly as a sanction would be absolutely devastating. And
I think it's ready to roll. And the other one is, you mentioned Nord Stream 2. If we tell the Germans, you're not doing it. You're not accepting gas through that pipeline, and we'll come up with alternative sources, ship it over. That would really hurt Russia's economy. They need the money from that pipeline.
But interestingly, that creates a real tension between the US and Germany, because Germany is suffering huge energy price increases, as is the whole of Europe, including the UK. So there are many in Europe who, in a sense, want that pipeline open to reduce energy prices. So there's a tension there.
Both administrations, Trump and Biden, have sort of reluctantly gone along with this pipeline. But things will change if he goes into Ukraine. He's been told that. I'm sure he'll be told it again today on this phone call. I find it interesting that Putin initiated the phone call. We got to find out what is it he wants clarification on.
We know that he's never to be underestimated. He's always got a strategy, always got a plan. John, stay with us, because I do want to just also talk about Afghanistan. Emerging interviews here in the UK from Afghan Ghani, and that again, the risk of famine there, really important. Stay with us, John Le Bouillier, coming up after the news. It's Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell could face life in jail as she's found guilty of recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And pandemic pressure, lateral flow tests and PCR appointments in England ran out for a second day. Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have already started their appeal after she was convicted of recruiting underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. During the trial, 4 women described being abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. The 6-year-old is now facing the rest of her life behind bars after being found guilty of charges, including sex trafficking a minor.
The road to justice has been far too long. But today, justice has been done. I want to commend the bravery of the girls.
PCR appointments and lateral flow tests are unavailable in England for the second day in a row because of exceptional demand in the build-up to New Year's Eve. The Health Secretary is warning people they'll have to wait a little bit longer for COVID testing because the system is under significant pressure amid surging levels of infections. Meanwhile, the NHS is ramping up preparations for a possible rise in Omicron hospital admissions with new surge hubs across England. 8 hospital locations and some gyms and education centres, which will hold around 100 patients each, are being set up to prepare for worst-case scenarios. And a coroner has ruled the Liverpool bomber made an explosive device with murderous intent. Ahmad al-Swilmeen was killed when his bomb detonated inside a cab outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. It's also emerged he made it at his own flat in the city and that it was designed to project shrapnel. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Reason re-engineered. Richard Tice on Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV. From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice, fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We've been talking during the show about the highlights of 2021, but also give us a call or a tweet with your reflections, your hopes for 2022. How we're going to have more joy, how we're going to return to normal after 2021. But what were your highs and lows in 2021? What would you like to see in 2022? One of my concerns about the early months of 2022 is a potential for a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, a potential famine following the collapse, in a sense, of life in Afghanistan when the Taliban took over back in August. And I've still got with me John Le Bouillier, the Republican former congressman, to talk about this, because, John, this was probably President Biden's biggest low point in his presidency. In a sense, the awful evacuation of not only Western troops, Allied troops, but also extracting so many people from so many Afghans who'd been helping the troops, helping Western allies from Afghanistan. It was a terrible time in August, and I fear the consequences that we will regret those for years, if not decades, to come.
I can't disagree with a word you said. I mean, I think it was very badly handled. I've thought about it a lot since August, Richard, and trying to understand, was there any better way that it could? I mean, obviously it could look better, but how would you actually do it better? There's really very little precedent about withdrawing from a combat situation where the force you've been fighting is about to take over, but they're going to let you leave peacefully and let all the people with brains and education and money all leave also.
I mean, catastrophic. And of course, it wasn't just the evacuation of the personnel, but at the same time, all of the equipment. I mean, billions and billions of dollars worth of high quality, well specified equipment, tanks, helicopters, all of this stuff, ammunition, guns. I mean, the whole lot was left as people left at speed. But it didn't need to be this way, surely. I mean, in a sense, given that the Taliban had breached their agreements in terms of, continuing to take over towns and cities throughout Afghanistan, they'd breached the agreement. Actually, the US and the West, in a sense, we could have said they were in breach of the agreement and therefore the deal's off.
Well, we could have, but let me just specify. As far as I know, all the equipment that was left was the equipment we, including you and NATO, gave to the Afghan military. The American military equipment was removed systematically, and the stuff that wasn't removed was destroyed, so it was not of use to the enemy. And I think probably most of the NATO countries did that too. That the pictures, though, of those parking lots filled with tanks and artillery and helicopters, that's stuff we gave to the Afghan military. Now, there was talk right after the evacuation that we might go and bomb all that stuff so they couldn't use it. The problem is, if you do that and you're still somewhat negotiating with the Taliban to get more people out, and they have been letting us get some people out, which brings to your very important point about the humanitarian crisis. And we are talking, we, the West and NATO and America, are talking to the Taliban in Doha regularly, including about financial aid to avert more of this humanitarian crisis. At some point, some Arab countries are going to have to get involved here as intermediaries more to get food. Even if we provide the food, they got to get it in there. And the Taliban has to give it to the people, not, as usual, keep it for the leadership and their own favorite people.
I mean, this is exactly the thing, isn't it? That there's so much concern that, in a sense, if you ease up on the sanctions, then it won't be ordinary people that get the benefit of it. The food will be stolen, the money will be stolen, the logistical support will be taken by the leadership. I'm afraid there's a grim track record of that over recent months and years. But these are the coldest months, aren't they? I mean, we're talking about millions of people potentially on the borderline of starvation.
It's a very bad. The whole thing is bad. It's been bad in Afghanistan for all our lives. I mean, it's not a happy scene. But in thinking it through, we went in there after 9/11, of course. We took down the Taliban right away, who did not attack us. It was Al-Qaeda who attacked us. We took over the country. We helped elections occur. We helped women. We did good things for the people. We, being you guys and NATO and the United States together as allies, we did a good thing. But in America, at least, and I'm sure in Great Britain it's the same thing, you can't ask the taxpayers or mothers and fathers to give up their money as taxpayers and their children as soldiers forever to Afghanistan. I mean, at some point, it's just too much. Unless we all agreed, and maybe we should have, and maybe in retrospect, we might wish we did. Once we went in, we're never leaving.
Well, but in a sense, okay, we were there 20 years, but the reality is we've been in other places for much longer. I mean, the UK, we've been in countries for longer. The US, you've been in South Korea for decades and decades. You know, sometimes these things, it's a strategic geopolitical footprint, and by abandoning Afghanistan, essentially we've left it open to the Belt and Road Initiative extension from China, Afghanistan, sometimes described as the Saudi Arabia of lithium, which obviously is a very valuable metal. I just think we've knowingly left a vacuum. And I think you've got a short-term humanitarian crisis. Even our own former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, he's written extensively about it just in recent days. And you've got, I mean, just videos yesterday or the day before of the destruction of musical equipment. We're hearing stories of women not being able to, young girls not being able to go to school again. It just gets, it looks as though it's going from bad to worse to worse.
Well, let me just say about a precedent. Yeah, we're in Korea. We have 28,500 soldiers there, but we're in a country that's an ally of ours. They're not killing American soldiers. We're there to prevent North Korea from coming in. We have troops still in England. We still have troops in West Germany from World War II's post setup. But we're with friends. We're not being attacked by the Germans and the English and whoever. In Afghanistan, to stay there, we would have been in a permanent confrontational situation with the Taliban. And I just don't think there's any hunger in the West to fight a never-ending war there. So it's always bad. I mean, the whole thing was bad. maybe what I thought it at the time, in April of 2011, when we took, or May, or became early May, when we took down bin Laden, that was the mission originally. We should have packed up and left then.
Yeah. And what's the mood now in the US about Afghanistan? Do people just regret it and the story's moved on? Or do you think there's still, does it appear in the news much, the potential for a famine? Doesn't appear at all.
A little bit, but I mean, I really think America moves on.
Yes.
And when there's these retrospectives that you're talking about at the end of the year, when we look back and we bring it up, people are not happy. How can you be happy with any of it? But they also want to get out. They wanted to get out. Biden ran on getting out. Trump ran on getting out. Trump almost got us out, not quite, and didn't quite pull it off. And he got played by the military. And Biden was smarter than that. He wouldn't get played by the military, and he got us out. And when he runs for re-election, I think that will actually be a strong point for him. He will stand up and say, I told you I'd get out, and I did. And I think more people than not will say, yeah, that was a good thing.
Interesting. That assumes that he will run for re-election. John, thank you so much for those reflections on various matters, from Ghislaine Maxwell to the situation in Ukraine and also in Afghanistan. And just leaving a little teaser there that maybe President Biden will stand for re-election for a second term as president, despite the fact that he would be over 80. Thank you, John Le Bouillier, former Republican congressman. Stay with me. Bring your calls, 0344 499 1000. What are your hopes for next year? Do you hope Boris will do a better job? Do you think he's capable of doing a better job to lead the UK as we try and recover from COVID? Or do you think actually, basically, he's done, he got Brexit done to a certain degree, and actually we need new leadership, fresh leadership to drive our recovery? 0344 499 1000. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
online, and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. A wet and windy afternoon ahead for central and northern areas. Elsewhere, it'll be grey but warm, staying mild for the evening. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Earlier, heavy downpours will ease, leaving scattered showers for the afternoon. As we move into the evening, much of this rain will worsen and spread across the UK. We'll also see some strong winds and coastal gales. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio. Powered by common sense. Activated by opinion. The voice of reason. In search of the perfect debate.
Free Speech Radio.
On the app, on your smart speaker, and on the money.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio, and we've got lots of tweets coming in about the segment we did just then with Alan Mendoza on potential terrorists being released earlier, having been considered by the parole board. One here said it's about time the parole board names, people sitting on the parole board, were made public, so there was transparent information when they decide to release dangerous people to the public, or perhaps they should be made criminally responsible. Well, certainly, I think there's always been concerns about who does sit on these parole boards and why they make the decisions they do, and the quality of information that is released to the public. Keep those calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. Your thoughts. Steve is in Hampshire. Very good afternoon to you, Steve. What's going on? What were your reflections on 2021 or your hopes for next year?
Good afternoon to you. My reflections of, what's significant, at the beginning of the year, February actually, I had the first AstraZeneca vaccine. I state this as a matter of fact simply, and then 7 or 8 days later had quite a significant stroke. So life changed significantly. I was a long-distance lorry driver and a keen motorcyclist. That disappeared overnight. But
I'm sorry to hear that, Steve.
No, I state it as a matter of fact. But the positive from that is, I've learned for a long time, it's acceptance and looking for the positives always. And there certainly has been some. And, life's got a whole lot simpler. I'm able to spend time with family. I was long distance before, so I saw very little of my family. So it's been a good and a bad year because of those circumstances. But just as far as a wish for the coming year,
yes,
it would be, if it were possible, and I know it's not. I kind of understand. I'm a realist, but just. One of your speakers spoke about these early prison releases, and he mentioned the lie detectors, and he suggested that they can be quite reliable these days. And I just thought it would be a nice idea, possibly, before any politician made a public, any sort of public address, announcement, speech.
You'd like to have some of the politicians have lie detectors when they make speeches, or I guess when they answer questions from the media. It's a very interesting idea, Steve. If they're accurate, then we might not. Then we might see some quite interesting results. I'm not sure they'd allow that to take place, though, would they?
I don't think they would, and I can sort of understand it. Ignorance is bliss in a sense, but at least a move towards it in some of the things that are truly significant and impact on every member of society, regardless of their circumstances or position. Just, like Churchill said, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. We know we're going through a very difficult time. We don't know whose fault it is irrelevant. But I just think people are desperate for some sense of security and a bit of firm ground to stand on, knowing, all right, these are the circumstances. And why are you doing these? What's the true motivation? And I think that mentally it would help the country's mental health.
There's no question. I mean, so many people have suffered mental health issues through this whole crisis. But interestingly, when you talk about politicians, very often, though, even though we know they're talking nonsense, actually they believe it themselves. They've somehow convinced themselves that white is black, that red is blue, and that what they're saying is the truth. And we saw that time and time again with some of their explanations for their decisions through the COVID crisis. And I think, as you say, people actually do just want some frank honesty about it's obvious when anyone's going to make mistakes with the unprecedented nature of the crisis, but you never heard them say, they always just said, we're following the science, we've got the best experts, we're the best in the world. And they've never really admitted that they made mistakes and that actually they can learn from those mistakes, make faster judgments in the future and just keep people appraised.
I accept, and that's a good point, this thing about saying, actually, do you know what, we got it wrong, but we genuinely were acting in what we felt would be everybody's best interest here. So that's another issue, really, this thing about accepting responsibility and saying, do you know what, we got it wrong, and that would be helpful. But I accept that it's not always possible to tell everybody exactly what's going on. And the other thing I would say, because I've come to realise that I genuinely believe that politicians, when they choose that career to go down that path, they genuinely want to help and do positive things.
Oh, without question. I think almost all of them go in with good intentions.
Yes.
But sometimes they then the power goes to individuals' heads, and many of them it's a career path, and they don't want to lose that. And that's just that lack of honesty, that lack of just tell it as it is. People know when something's not working. People know that it's difficult. Just tell it as it is, as opposed to cover it up, put a load of spin on it, and to essentially try and deceive people. We're not stupid. People understand.
Yeah.
And just actually some breaking news here, Steve. Whilst you've been on, this is pretty extraordinary. The Welsh Health Ministry have agreed to lend England a further 4 million tests. I don't know whether they're lateral flow tests. I think they are lateral flow tests. Bringing mutual aid. Goodness me, the Welsh are giving aid to England. They're lending us 10 million lateral flow tests because we've got a bit of a shortage here. The distribution of tests through home delivery and pharmacies struggling here in England. I mean, what do you make of that? The Welsh are now lending the English. It's almost like their own internal version of foreign aid.
On the face of it, that's a nice thing to do. It's a positive thing to do. But what does come to mind when it comes to Wales and Scotland, and again, matter of factly, it's only my opinion, I accept that, but what I do find interesting about what some of the things that they've done in Wales and Scotland regarding pubs, basically. I'm of a certain age, from a certain background, pubs, let's call them pubs, and the fact that, you can go in the pub, but you've got to go home at 7, 8 o'clock. What's that all about? I just find it very interesting what people are trying to sneak in at the moment and what the true motivation is. Again, back to the truth. Just tell us the truth, and then we can make a decision and decide whether we want you in the position you're in or not. But
Steve, I don't think anybody wants a pub to close at 7 o'clock. And of course, there were situations, I think it was in Scotland, where you go to the pub until 6 o'clock, but you couldn't actually buy alcohol. Steve from Hampshire, thank you so much for those thoughts. Steve suggesting that maybe politicians should use lie detectors. I'm not sure they'd agree to that for pretty obvious reasons. Coming up after the top of the hour, we've got Emily Carver, Conservative commentator, with her thoughts for the year just gone and also her hopes for the year ahead. And I'm afraid we have to talk about some woke nonsense. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 3, I'm Deirdre Tudor. Ghislaine Maxwell is to appeal her conviction after being found guilty of recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And pandemic pressure, lateral flow tests and PCR appointments in England run out for a second day. Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have already started their appeal after she was convicted of recruiting underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. During the trial, 4 women described being abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. The 6-year-old is now facing the rest of her life behind bars after being found guilty of charges, including sex trafficking a minor.
The road to justice has been far too long. But today, justice has been done. I want to commend the bravery of the girls.
PCR appointments and lateral flow tests are unavailable in England for the second day in a row because of exceptional demand in the build-up to New Year's Eve. The Health Secretary is warning people they'll have to wait a little bit longer for COVID testing because the system is under significant pressure amid surging levels of infections. Meanwhile, the NHS is ramping up preparations for a possible rise in Omicron hospital admissions with new surge hubs across England. 8 hospital locations and some gyms and education centres, which will hold around 100 patients each, are being set up to prepare for worst-case scenarios. A group of anti-vaccine activists who shouted abuse at NHS staff and vandalised equipment has been condemned by the Health Secretary. Sajid Javid said he was appalled by the vile behaviour. And a coroner has ruled the Liverpool bomber made an explosive device with murderous intent. Ahmad Al-Swilmin was killed when his bomb detonated inside a cab outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice. Powered by debate. Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the third and final hour of the show, and as I look outside over London, the clouds are getting darker. Much darker. I'm hoping, though, that actually people's mood will get lighter and brighter and sunnier as we enter the new year with new hopes, new dreams and new ambitions. We've got a couple of tweets coming in just from the last segment about the politicians and the lie detector, which is quite fun. The problem for politicians is if they told the electorate the truth, they'd never be elected. Well, that's quite interesting. And then another one, that was from David. One here from Ray, which is great fun. I admire this. Surely the Welsh will need all of those tests when their revellers return home from New Year's parties from Bristol after the 31st. There may well be some truth from that. I'm quite amused by the idea of the devolved nations, in a sense, sort of lending each other lateral flow tests. You couldn't really make it up, could you? And maybe we'll discuss this with my next guest, because I'm delighted to be joined now by Emily Carver, Conservative commentator. Emily, a very good afternoon, and I hope you're enjoying the festive season. Great to see you. Thanks for being with us. So we've been talking about a sort of review of the year, the highs, the lows, the laughter and the tears. And I'm sure you've had plenty of those. What's been your high and what's been your low point in the year just gone?
Well, I mean, something that's been a low point, I mean, apart from all the COVID nonsense, which has sort of turned a little farcical recently, with essentially hundreds of thousands of healthy people being forced to stay at home and isolate during the Christmas period for what is, luckily for most people, just a cold. But besides from that, what's really been a low, I think, is how the government has essentially, through its own interventions and through its own bad policy, pushed up the cost of living to such an extent that people are going to have, well, it looks like the next year is going to be very difficult for people. I mean, just look at the way the government has mismanaged energy policy, and that's successive governments that are to blame. But the Conservatives came on a manifesto where they promised to level up the country. I don't think, energy bills being hundreds of pounds higher for all.
We've just lost you there for a moment, I think, Emily. You've frozen.
Family. So I think that's going to be something that the government has to grapple with.
That's a key point. We just lost you for a few seconds there, but I think you were saying that essentially at the moment, the only thing that's being levelled up are the energy bills, the electricity and gas bills for households up and down the whole of the country. They're being levelled, and they're being levelled dramatically upwards. We think we may have lost you again. Are you? I'm hoping you're with us there, Emily. Just talk about the energy bills, and in a sense, all of those are just soaring. I saw a letter, Emily, in I think it was the Telegraph this morning, where one pensioner who lives on his own, and he was saying that he'd just heard from his energy supplier that his bill would go from £1,600, the forecast, to over £3,000. He must have been on quite a good fixed tariff, but I mean, this is unsustainable.
Well, it's totally unsustainable. And I think, whatever you think about the net zero agenda, I'm very skeptical of it. I think most people in this country would agree that energy security has to come first. And our government has failed to put that first. I mean, why weren't we investing in fracking? Why don't we have a reserve of gas like other countries like the US have? We know that people are still going to be reliant on gas for a long time, regardless of renewable technologies, which are great, but they can't sustain our economy and keep energy bills in the short term. So I think the government really have to get to grips with this. Of course, inflation is on the rise too. I'd like to see the government pushing for lowering taxes. Those are short-term fixes for the energy problem. We need long-term fixes for that to get energy prices lower. But in the meantime, they really need to think about cutting VAT, cutting those green levies, which are really raising energy bills for ordinary people. Because otherwise, I mean, look at businesses, not just families. Businesses are having their costs rise, I wouldn't say exponentially, but obviously they're hiking massively due to costs of energy. And we don't want to see those businesses going bust. I mean, that's going to be less tax take, isn't
Completely.
it?
It's interesting. You refer there to some short-term measures that actually the government could take in terms of reducing VAT, reducing some of the subsidies to the renewable companies and essentially taking those away. There is a suggestion following the meeting between the business secretary and some of the leaders of the energy companies about almost trying to sort of smooth the cash flow of these increases. But I think they're being incredibly naive. I think we could be into dramatically higher gas prices on the world market because basically Putin has got such a control over continental Europe with regard to energy prices.
Well, this is the thing. We know energy. Everyone knows that energy as a commodity is very volatile. And that's why it's an absolute disgrace. And it is a national scandal that our government doesn't have the gas reserves that we will need to deal with the threats of, well, international dictators like Putin, who have the power to essentially hike up prices and reduce supply.
I mean,
so I think
just before you came on, Emily, we were talking about politicians not telling the truth. It's only 4 years ago, in the Conservative Manifesto of 2017, that they said they were going to create a huge fracking industry, and the likes of Kwasi Kwarteng and Matt Hancock were sort of boldly pronouncing that this was the brave new world. And all of a sudden, first sight of a couple of eco-bullies, and they've run for the hills.
Well, this is the thing. In this country, we have a class of, I guess you could call them a sort of smug middle-class green lobby who, yes, they talk a good game. They talk about how great renewables are, how dirty fossil fuels are, and so on. But when you look at people in this country who are going to be faced with hundreds of pounds added to their energy bills and have to choose between the food they eat and heating their home, I think they need to check themselves and realize that, yes, we want to move to a greener energy. That's fantastic. But energy security has to come first. And I think Boris Johnson in 2022 should definitely rethink the net zero agenda. Stop trying to pick winners, which he's done.
But of course, But in reality, Emily, particularly with COP26, I mean, he's boxed himself into a massive, massive corner. To do a U-turn on that, I mean, you know, Boris has a pretty tenuous relationship with the truth, but I mean, that would be the U-turn of all U-turns of all U-turns. I can't see, and I'm not sure they really have any understanding. I mean, you know, they say that the public doesn't want fracking. I can tell you, Emily, I knocked on thousands of doors in the last 7 weeks. In Bexley and in North Shropshire, and almost everybody, not quite everybody, almost everybody is very patriotic about wanting a secure supply of our own energy. They want to buy gas here in the UK, and the vast, vast majority of people are very happy with the idea of fracking and using shale gas.
Well, I think a lot of people weren't aware of the trade-offs or thought that our energy supply wouldn't be affected by such decisions. At the time, fracking was portrayed very cleverly by the eco lobby as being dirty, as being dangerous, as potentially risking our safety. And they did that very, very effectively. But unfortunately, our politicians weren't strong enough not to kowtow to those demands. And now look at us. We're left in a state where we're just impacted by the likes of Putin to such an extent that people are essentially going to be, well, priced out of basic goods in this country. And that's not good enough for Britain in, you know, going into 2022. We really should have cheap energy by now.
So these are our concerns. What are your hopes? What can the government do well that may bring some light relief, may make things better? or is it all, in a sense, is it all as doom and gloomy as the skies outside my studio here?
No, I don't think everything's gloomy. I mean, if we look across to the continent, our economy is doing pretty well compared to other nations. I think we've got that right in some ways. I think also we haven't slipped down the authoritarian path as much as some of our friends in Europe have done.
It feels pretty bad to me.
It's pretty bad, but we're not locking down the unvaccinated yet, thank goodness. So we've got that on Austria and Germany, I believe, as well. But, I think there's a lot to look forward to. I mean, Brexit happened, and it's up to our government to make the most of it, and it's up to businesses and individuals to do so as well. So I think there could be some sunny uplands, but I think the government needs to get back to its conservative principles, get some of that free market inspiration back into their policy making, and stop trying to fix markets like the energy system. They could get rid of that energy price cap for starters, which of course is just, one of the reasons why so many energy companies have gone bust over the last 3 months.
Yes, but in a sense, it's the retail companies that have gone bust. But the wholesale prices is what's really caused the problem, isn't it? And those have been set on the world market because we're not generating and extracting enough of our own domestic gas. Whereas when the Tories took charge, of course, 11 years ago, we were pretty much neutral in terms of being a net importer or net exporter of energy.
Yes, but I guess the government's interventions in terms of technologies and sending a signal to the market that gas isn't something you want to invest in. I mean, it's been years that the government's net zero agenda has told businesses, told individuals that gas isn't the future. It's not what you want to invest in. It's going to be taxed heavily. It's going to be potentially banned in the future and so on. And now what we've got is, as you just said, not domestic energy security, which is something that people can't go on with. But I do think the government in some ways has been strong in terms of, perhaps not as strong as I'd like, in terms of cultural concerns, in terms of free speech, in terms of cancel culture and so on. I'd like to see the government standing up for more in that respect. But again, they're very confused, I think, between the departments. So I'd like to see some more coherence, but perhaps we'll head towards that.
My concern, Emily, is they talk a good game. There's no one better at talking a good game and impressing constituency associations than Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. But actually, when it comes to delivery, we just don't get it. We just don't get the action.
No, I mean, that's another area that's a bit of a disaster. Talking to you right now, I'm feeling more depressed, Richard.
Before we let you go, what's your biggest hope for Boris for next year? Do you think he'll still be there at the end of the year? Is that, in a sense, his biggest ambition?
Well, I hope that he's done some thinking over this festive period, over the Christmas holidays, and decided that he should probably listen to some of his backbenchers who would like to see him, return to his conservative principles if he ever had them. So I think he probably will cling on for a little longer. Otherwise, there's certainly Liz Truss and Rishi waiting in the wings.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, for that. I think if he doesn't return to his conservative principles, he will be gone before the end of next year. That was Emily Carver, the Conservative commentator, with her reflections on the year, her thoughts for next year. And it's not that easy looking for the sunny uplands. But give us a call with your hopes, your aspirations, 0344 499 1000. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Ross Clark, the columnist in the Daily Mail. An amazing article he's written today to talk about that, the cost of living, tax increases. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. A wet and windy afternoon ahead for the central and northern areas of the country. Elsewhere, it'll be grey but warm, staying mild for the evening. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Earlier, heavy downpours will ease, leaving scattered showers for the afternoon, but it'll still feel warm, temperatures hovering around 13 degrees. As we move into the evening, much of this rain will worsen and spread across the UK. We'll also see strong winds and some coastal gales. It's not all bad news, though, as it'll stay mild, peaking at 13 degrees in the south. Looking ahead at the 5-day forecast. Cloudy in London for the next couple of days, turning wetter on Sunday, where heavy rain will set in, and mild over the weekend with temperatures peaking at 14 degrees. Now, a mixed outlook down south in Hove, dry until Sunday when rain will set in there. This will get heavier as we move into next week, but we will see some sunshine too. Sun and cloud for Newcastle, starting warm at 13 degrees tomorrow and getting colder over the weekend, dipping down to just 5 degrees on Tuesday. Meanwhile, in America, a possible tornado has been spotted in the state of Georgia. Strong winds have damaged properties and trees in the city of Bainbridge. No casualties have been recorded. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio.
Accept no substitutes.
Access all arguments.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Free Speech Radio.
Shut up and listen.
We're on your side.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio. We were just talking there with Emily Carver about her hopes and aspirations for next year, and we know there are some big challenges, and we're not talking COVID challenges. Actually, it's about the cost of living, tax increases, energy price increases, and more besides, as well as, of course, inflation. And there's no one who understands this more and better than the columnist from the Daily Mail, Ross Clark, who's written a brilliant piece in today's Mail with a pretty stark headline. A financial storm is coming, and the Tories will face a battering if they still put up taxes. And I thought actually Ross completely hit the nail on the head. And I'm delighted that he's now joining us here on Talk Radio. Ross, a very good afternoon to you. I hope you've enjoyed the festive season, albeit you probably, in a sense, didn't enjoy writing this article because it just sets out everything that I've been concerned about. And I think that I just wonder whether actually Boris and Number 10 and the government have any inkling about what you've been writing about.
Well, I'm not sure they do. I mean, basically, there's a very big triple whammy going to hit most households from April onwards. I mean, at the moment, we've sort of sailed through this pandemic, and a lot of people are feeling actually quite well off at the moment. You know, if you've own a house, its value's gone up. If you own shares, the stock market's risen. We've been in this sort of bizarre world where we've sort of economic boom at the same time we've had a pandemic. But from April, it's all going to change very sharply because we've got energy prices. Well, wholesale energy prices already shot up, but in April, the government's going to revise its price cap upwards. So a lot of people are going to see their energy bills, gas, electricity bills probably double. At the same time, we've got these national insurance rises in 1.25% for anybody who's earning over the minimum wage. And also the government's freezing the income tax threshold. So, we got inflation at 6%, and that's going to really make a huge difference to your...
So it's a very strange position because you touched on it. And, you could say for those lucky enough to own assets, whether it's property, whether it's shares, you could say actually all's fine and dandy. Property prices are soaring. I mean, in Wales, for example, they've gone up, I read earlier today, by 15%. In many other parts of the country, likewise. Stock market prices and indices are back to pre-COVID levels. So you sort of say, well, what's the problem. But it's that old phrase, isn't it, that I think so many people, whether you have assets or not, but even if you do have assets, actually you could be asset rich and cash poor, particularly actually for pensioners, people approaching or who've recently retired. And of course, these increases, Ross, they're essentially, their prices, they're net of tax. You've actually got to earn a pre-tax amount to be able to pay for it.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, people are losing out most in a way are those pensioners who are trying to live on fixed incomes. And, we've got interest rates still down at near 400-year lows, 0.25%. And yet, you're getting virtually no return on your savings at all. And yet inflation is up 5%, expected to rise above 6%. Well, your savings are just being eroded at a very rapid rate, and a faster rate than at any time since the 1970s.
But there are some positives actually, which you put in your article, that the government could do, and this is the key question, isn't it, Ross, as to whether they will have the nous and the awareness to do this. It's the opposite of what they've suggested. But for example, you talk about the renewable subsidies that every household pays, which I think approaches £200 per household per year, and then actually cutting taxes rather than raising taxes.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, people are probably not necessarily aware of this, but 25% of your electricity bill is what are called social and environmental levies. That's subsidies for wind farms and the like, and for insulation schemes for households on low incomes. That's a quarter of your electricity bill now goes on that. It's a sort of huge invisible tax. So it's 2.5% of your gas bills. Now, given that energy prices are going to double for some people, the government's got to look at that and say, well, look, can we take some of these levies off bills and give people some relief that way? But as for national insurance, this is a tax, plain and simple tax on jobs. You don't pay it on your investments. You do pay it if you're earning a living, which of course most people are. And when Tories were in opposition, they called it the jobs tax. Yet now they're in government, they're doing exactly the same as Gordon Brown used to do. They're jacking up national insurance in the hope that we wouldn't notice it as much as we would if they increased income tax.
But very often there's a lack of awareness about the ability to cut taxes and what it actually does. I've been promoting that we should be cutting taxes for the least well off and small businesses. I want to lift the personal income tax threshold from £12,500 to £20,000, which puts almost an extra 30 quid a week into the pockets, particularly for the lowest paid, the least well off. That's really significant. I want to increase the threshold for corporation tax from £0 to £100,000 so that small businesses can invest, they can employ more people, because lower taxes actually creates higher growth, higher wages, and therefore in the medium term you get higher tax revenues. Why doesn't this Conservative government understand basic economic philosophy?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's this sort of idea that sort of seeped into politics in the past decades, mostly from the Labour Party, but now the Tories seem to be sort of signed up to it, or at least the Prime Minister does, that, only the government can stimulate economic growth, and therefore you must spend public money in order to stimulate growth, and that's the only way you'll get it. Well, if you're going to take money out of people's pockets in the form of tax, well, they're going to spend less, and they are going to stimulate the economy less. And I think it's sort of shown time and time again that if you want to stimulate the economy, you get money into the pockets of low-income groups, not necessarily so much the high-income groups, because they tend to squirrel it away, save it, or invest it in houses. But if you put it in the pockets of low-income groups, then they will spend money. Spending more money stimulates the economy.
That's the thing, because if you stimulate money into those low-income groups, into small businesses, the money circulates around the economy more times, and that what they call the multiplier effect, that's what creates growth. And so actually by cutting taxes for smaller businesses and the lowest paid, you'll actually get much higher growth. I think you'd get more than 1% per annum. And that's what creates activity. And the other point, Ross, is, of course, at the end of the day, individuals and small businesses will always spend £1 in their pocket more wisely, more productively, in a smarter fashion than some civil servant in Whitehall will spend it on your behalf.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's not just the case of cutting taxes. We've also got to cut spending. And I mean, no government of either colour has succeeded in balancing the books in 2 decades. Since it was 2002, 2003 was the last year a UK government ran a surplus, and a tiny surplus at that it was. Since then, we've been spending more and more, and the gap between government spending and government revenue has been growing ever wider. And so, you know, that just piles on the debt, and we're now spending £37 billion a year just on debt interest. And that's more than we spend, for example, on transport. It's nearly as much as we spend on defence. And if you just run up these debts year after year, then you get into this situation where you've maxed out on your credit card, and you're just sort of borrowing money just to pay the interest on you.
Well, the only way out of it, surely, Ross, we've got to be optimistic, to give hope to our listeners. We've got to grow our way out of it, and that means you put the foot on the accelerator of growth, and you can't tax your way out of this crisis.
No, you certainly can't tax your way out of this crisis. I think that, if taxes do have to rise in some ways, and, maybe at some point they have to rise, but the sort of thing we should be looking at is, doing away with some of the allowances for, I don't see why we should need to give sort of huge tax-free allowances to people to invest in their pensions, for example, right up the income scale. Can we just sort of cut out those allowances and bring down the tax rates and let people choose how to spend their money? And, if we could have I'm a great advocate of a flat tax, perhaps a 2-rate flat tax.
You should be reading my manifesto then, Ross, because that's very much moving in that direction. Ross, we could go on for a lot longer, but time is against us. Thank you so much, Ross Clark, for your thoughts. The columnist for the Daily Mail. Do read his article if you can. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Dawn Neeson about all matters woke madness. Yes, stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
These are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. Ghislaine Maxwell is to appeal her conviction after being found guilty of recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And pandemic pressure, lateral flow tests and PCR appointments in England run out for a second day. Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have already started their appeal after she was convicted of recruiting underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. During the trial, 4 women described being abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. The 6-year-old is now facing the rest of her life behind bars after being found guilty of charges including sex trafficking a minor.
The road to justice has been far too long. But today, justice has been done. I want to commend the bravery of the girls.
PCR appointments and lateral flow tests are unavailable in England for the second day in a row because of exceptional demand in the build-up to New Year's Eve. The Health Secretary is warning people they'll have to wait a little bit longer for COVID testing because the system is under significant pressure amid surging levels of infections. Meanwhile, the NHS is ramping up preparations for a possible rise in Omicron hospital admissions with new surge hubs across England. 8 hospital locations and some gyms and education centres, which will hold around 100 patients each, are being set up to prepare for worst-case scenarios. A group of anti-vaccine activists who shouted abuse at NHS staff and vandalised equipment has been condemned by the Health Secretary. Sajid Javid said he was appalled by the vile behaviour. And a coroner has ruled a Liverpool bomber made an explosive device with murderous intent. Ahmad Al-Swilmeen was killed when his bomb detonated inside a cab outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk at Talk Radio. We're into the last half hour of the show, and then we've got Christo from 4 till 7, and after 7 we've got Claudia Liza. The tweets are coming in. Real concern about the prospect of the parole board releasing next year, early releasing of terrorists. Real concern indeed. One here from Christopher who says on Twitter, "This cannot be serious. Only in this woke country would it be considered." I think that's absolutely right, actually. And we're going to be talking about woke matters in a second. But one more tweet that I can't resist here. Of course, Wales can spare some lateral flow tests to England because we're as good as locked up with nothing to open, nothing to go and do or to take part in, no sports, no theatres, no entertainment, no parties. Well, that's what you get if you vote Mark Drakeford to be your leader. At which point we're going to talk matters woke, which is driving us all nuts. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dawn Neeson, Daily Star columnist, commentator, and a constant battler against matters woke. Dawn, a very good afternoon. Are you enjoying the festive season? And
very much so, Richard. Good afternoon. Lovely to join you this afternoon. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm making the most of it, and heartfelt sympathies to everyone entrapped in Wales and Scotland at the moment, because this should not be happening. We should all be preparing for a very happy new year, and the way this country has been divided is just heartbreaking. So good luck to all our friends north of the border and in Wales.
Absolutely. I think in a sense, bizarrely, I mean, I guess credit where credit's due, Boris did at least resist the entreaties of the scientists, but I'm not sure whether it was Boris or whether actually it was thanks to the 101 Tory MPs who essentially rebelled and voted against the whip.
You know what, Richard? I don't for 1 minute think it was Boris finally reclaiming his testicles from his wife's handbag. I think it was him actually thinking about his own career and protecting his own backside. I don't think he was thinking about our livelihoods, our lives, our mental well-being in any way, shape or form. However, for whatever reason he made that decision, I am so grateful that he did, because you could feel the mood of certainly England lifting. It is just so important that we move on and we move forward, and we stop. I mean, one of the things we're going to talk about is one of the things that's really annoyed and outraged me and so many people around the country, including the devolved nations this year, is the way we have been deliberately terrorized by our own government and scientists, a government that we elect to serve us, and scientists that are supposedly experts who have decided to just constantly force feed us this worst case scenario. Richard, why have we always been looking for the dark when we should be looking for the light? And this time of the year, when it's about as grey as you can get outside, we all need some lightness at the moment.
We certainly do. Well, in a sense, that's the opportunity for the new year to look forward with some hope. But I'm not sure we're getting much hope, Dawn, from the council in Swanage, in Dorset, that decided it would be a good idea, because they had one complaint from a holidaymaker about the name of a particular street, which was called Darky Lane and had been called that for over 70 years. One holidaymaker complained, and therefore Swanage Town Council decided, at a vote, unbelievably, that they would change the name to Dark Lane. But then there was essentially they then overturned it when they realised that actually what they were thinking of doing was not what the residents wanted to do.
Well, this is the utter madness we are now. As you said, Richard, it was one complaint, but we are all so terrified to be seen to be doing the wrong thing or to be accused of being racist, which is the worst thing in the world to be accused of now. I mean, it's very similar to the story we had earlier in London, wasn't it? Well, there's our Black Boys Lane in North London, which was named after it was to do with the mines, and it was to do with the fact that people sort of like were covered in soot, so that they were black. It's nothing to do with the colour of people's actual skin. But that name is being changed, and all the residents that live in the street were saying, we don't want this. And you know, Richard, like most of these insane decisions, like where we are with the statues as well, it is costing thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money. I mean, I happen to live in Tower Hamlets, which is one of the poorest boroughs in London. And, you know, I literally, in the very week, we had a statue to a slave trade that no one, it wasn't even a slave trade, it was linked very vicariously to the slave trade, that was being torn down on the orders of Mayor Sadiq Khan. There was a kid literally knifed in my doorway. Okay, now where are our priorities? Most of the people in this area had no idea this statue was even there. And the mayor was so, oh, here I am, I'm sort of looking after you, this is what I'm doing. And it's like, no, you're not. You are not looking after the people that really matter. The poor kid, thankfully he survived, the poor kid who was knifed in gang crime on my doorstep. And this is where we are now. And you know, the thing is with all this woke things about changing names that one person found offensive, we are losing sight of the real problems with racism and hatred and division. It's not 300-year-old statues. It's what's going on now with kids knifing one another.
Completely. And in a sense, it's not only the cost of these council staff, mayor's staff and things, it's actually their time and focus and energy, which as you rightly say, means that they're not devoting it to the real issues that affect ordinary people up and down the country, in a sense, day in, day out, week in, week out. But Dawn, give us some hope. What do you think? Do you think we're winning in any shape or form some of these culture battles, the woke wars, or do you think that actually it's continuing down a very slidey, slippery slope?
I really hope that, you know, look, everything goes around in circles. I mean, this is how our lives evolve. So I really hope that there is now going to be a backlash coming against this utter madness. I mean, you know, the whole, what we are teaching kids in further education, sort of like, you know, the critical race theory and white privilege. And this is damaging children. This is damaging debate. It is damaging our education system. And I really hope that now people are taking a step back and going, we can't carry on doing this. It is just insane what we're doing, because what are we doing to future generations where we are wrapping them up so much in cotton wool that they will not be able to cope with the real life? People will disagree with you. Nobody, sort of, you know, you do not have the right not to be upset or offended. Life is going to be offensive. You need to learn to cope with that. And the younger you are, the better. So I really hope that there will be a backlash against this insane woke culture, you know, trigger warnings on everything from sort of like, you know, comedies from sort of like, you know, the 1980s to fairy tales, Richard. I mean, I grew up watching fairy tales. It didn't really upset me. I didn't think that I was going to be swept off my feet by a Prince Charming, although obviously open to offers. You know, I coped with it. You know, women, we coped with it, okay? We are not to be wrapped up in cotton wool and protected from the big bad world. We all need to start living in reality. And as I said, by concentrating on this nitty-gritty nitpicking that really is making a difference, we're losing sight of the real offensive stuff that's going on. And
a lot of this, actually, this sort of snowflake attitudes, I think, is being sort of stimulated and in a sense increased and enhanced in some of the universities and the colleges. Certainly discussions I've had recently really concern me about the sort of impositions on free speech, free thought. And I worry, actually, Dawn, that that in a sense, in universities at the moment, people don't feel that they have the right to be offended. They feel the opposite. They have a right to be protected, not to be triggered, and everything needs to be soft, cuddly, and just one line of sort of progressive thinking.
But this is not the real world. We have to stop this. And, you know, we have had lecturers who have done nothing wrong, who have said nothing wrong, but because their opinions go against what is correct speak, correct think, they are cancelled, and I'm starting to hate the words cancelled and woke because they are starting to become so sort of like cliched and meaningless. But it's like you have to be able to have debate, Richard. The one thing I think Talk Radio does incredibly well is that you can have a debate. You know, people can phone you, they can come on here and they can have a different opinion, but you are allowed to debate it. And it should be a debate without hate. This is the big thing I've had. It started with Brexit, when suddenly it was okay to hurl abuse at somebody who had a different political opinion. It's become even worse with the whole COVID situation, where it's, you know, when we really, in a global pandemic, we should be fighting together for the common good. Instead, we are hurling abuse at one another over whether you've had one vaccine or two vaccines or three vaccines, whether you're wearing a mask. It is insane. We should have the right to debate with one another and have different opinions.
In a courteous and civil way. You're so right, Dawn. And Dawn, you'll be delighted. One of the tweets that's just come in says, quote of the year so far from Dawn Neeson, Boris has finally reclaimed his testicles from his wife's handbag. What a great way, Dawn, to finish. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. That was Dawn Neeson with some thoughts on the woke madness. Have a great new year, Dawn. Look forward to seeing you in the new year. Coming up, we'll be taking your calls, going through some tweets. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. A wet and windy afternoon ahead for central and northern areas. Elsewhere, it'll be grey but warm, staying mild for the evening. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Earlier, heavy downpours will ease, leaving scattered showers for the afternoon. As we move into the evening, much of this rain will worsen and spread across the UK. We'll also see some strong winds and coastal gales. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Permanent, persuasive, profound.
The machine code of modern thinking.
Now with 0% drift and dither.
Radio with an answer for everything.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. We're into the last segment of the show, and the diversity of views and opinions is great. I love it. So looking at the tweets here, they couldn't be more diametrically opposed. One here is from a message. Thank you for your excellent contribution to Talk, Richard. Unlike most politicians, your sincerity is evident. Whereas Rajar, he says, Dick, you are like an amateur. I hope Collins isn't listening to his audience being shredded. P.S. Why don't you take calls, you coward? Well, actually, Rajar, we've got calls here, and I've been asking for calls all afternoon. There's still time for you to call in. Anyway, we have got Ian in the Lake District. Good afternoon to you, Ian. What would you like to say?
Well, hello and happy Christmas and New Year to you. Well, it's about the PCR testing, and in America, it's been announced by the CDC guidelines, and I'll read it out. The newly updated CDC guidelines don't require testing at the end of isolations because PCR tests can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky told Good Morning America. Now, think of the implications. You can have COVID and still test positive 12 weeks later from a PCR test.
I mean, to be honest, I hadn't actually read that, but I'd
it's
heard
all over Twitter.
Yeah,
it's actually an interview. You can watch it on ABC.
I mean, there have been concerns about PCR tests being essentially because they are so sensitive, particularly if you run them up to over 40 cycles, then they can pick up all sorts of things.
Yes. But people have been, well, there are notable people scientists who've been basically cancelled, saying this for 18 months on Talk Radio. You know, a diagnostic pathologist has been saying this, and she's just been ignored and had abuse held at her. And I'm sorry, but
I think this is part of sort of historical revisionism about some of the stuff that's gone on, Ian. And I think. You know, it's extraordinary, and the CDC does seem very capable of changing its mind pretty frequently. I mean, it's let's remember, you know, Anthony Fauci at the beginning of the crisis, he said masks don't work, and then he said masks did work.
I bought the book by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I haven't started reading it yet on Fauci, but that's supposed to be a bombshell. It goes right through the AIDS pandemic and everything, and how we ran that. But you know, I sometimes wonder if I'm going to wake up tomorrow and all this has been a bad dream.
Well. There's so much information flying around out there. We just have to try and make sure that it's accurate. And you know, I just think there are continuing concerns about the quality of all the tests. And there's no question that the issue of false positives and false negatives is probably bigger than we've been led to believe. Ian, thank you so much for that. We've got Rita in Slough. Rita, good afternoon to you. Just got a couple of minutes left. Hi, what would you like to say?
Hello, Richard. I'm just saying you're looking very handsome as ever.
Oh, you'll make me blush, Rita. Thank you.
No, you are. One of the top handsome men in the country, I think. Anyway, I would just like to say, you're talking about Pakistan and, Afghanistan and the famine.
Yes.
Where's Pakistan's role? Why are they not contributing any money towards the famine? Or to the future of Afghanistan, because they did help create the Taliban.
Yes, no, it's a really, really good point. And the honest answer is that I don't actually know the answer to that question. I guess that, in a sense, many countries are going to have to be involved in this humanitarian crisis that we know is coming over the next couple of months. And I would certainly hope that Pakistan will play its part. There's no question that they housed, some terrorists, in particular from Al Qaeda, and the militia and terrorists from the Taliban, because that border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, it's not really a border. It's essentially, it's a porous range of mountains, and I think it's really difficult. And of course, Pakistan has got such a massive sort of conflict of different vested interests.
Oh, okay. Yes, I see. Yes, thank you for that.
Well,
yes, yeah.
But you're absolutely right, Rita. Moving on to 2022, Rita. What's your biggest hope? Let's try and end on a high. What's your biggest hope for or ambition for 2022?
I hope everybody gets vaccinated and we can go back to normal life, and we control the vaccine, the COVID disease, and instead of it controlling us.
Oh, that's completely right. Actually, I am hopeful on that, Rita. I mean, we've got probably one of the highest vaccines take-ups. But the other thing that I've been talking about that I really think more people need to have confidence from is the improvements in the treatments if people do get COVID, and essentially it breached the vaccine protection. Because actually, Rita, the quality of the treatments is fantastic, and I think that's why we're starting to see much shorter stays in hospital, and which is a good thing. I think in many areas it's reduced almost by half. Rita, thank you so much for those thoughts. That was Rita from Slough, and I'm glad about this. Angela says, because I was a little bit concerned by Rajar's tweet, which was a bit brutal, calling me a complete amateur, and that Ian Collins would be devastated. But Angela has given me more hope by saying, I've enjoyed your show, you're not an amateur at all. Let me tell you, the pro of all pros has just arrived in the studio.
I don't know. It is
Christo.
I mean, it depends on the context in which you mean old pro. But I'll take the compliment either way.
I think you should. I mean, I've just been shredded by Rajar there. Well, how are you feeling, Christo? I know you were sort of a little bit anxious yesterday.
I was anxious yesterday. I was anxious about the direction we're going in, anxious about our gratitude for the freedoms that we should be allowed to have anyway, bearing in mind that we gave them up so easily so long ago. I have the daily Omicron figures again, which I'll reveal the latest number of people, how many people have died with Omicron in the last 24 hours. I'll do that after 4 o'clock. We'll be reacting to the Ghislaine Maxwell verdict. We will talk to the executive producer of a documentary about her and what effect this will have on Prince Andrew. We'll talk to our royal correspondent. We're going to have our political panel as well, reacting to all of that. We'll do, of course, Omicron Watch after 6 o'clock again.
Yep.
And we'll do the year according to Ali Mirage. And this will be in politics, the big political stories of 2021 as we look back on the year.
And I did a bit of look back, but also I think it's really interesting to look forward and what are the hopes and the fears. Who's on your political panel?
My political panel is going to be Ali May O'Hagan, who's the director for the Centre of Labour and Social Studies, and Ben Habib, the former Brexit Party MEP. I would just like some freedom.
We'd all love some freedom.
I would like a Conservative Party Prime Minister. Funnily enough.
And may I compliment you on a wonderful, wonderful neckchief there.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely splendid. A glorious pink chief that you'll see if you watch Christo live.
Is that me or the fashion? I'm not sure.
Everything. Stay with Christo. He's got lots coming up, lots of great talk. You've been a fantastic audience. I've had an amazing production team that have kept me on the straight and narrow. Have a very, very happy new year, whatever you're up to, enjoying it. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday when we're going to be looking forwards with predictions, ideas and thoughts for the new year. Stay with Christo and then it's Claudia Liza. You've been listening to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense, the one, the only Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.